Well, good morning, everybody. It's the day after, the night before, as it were. Last night, of course, was the first Conservative leadership debate on Channel 4, where we saw, for the first time, really, for a lot of them, the chance for the new candidates to be both Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister put through their paces in front of an audience of swing voters, of floating voters. I think it's fair to say that the floating voters were not overly impressed with a lot of them. The only one who got any consistent applause was Tom Tugendhat, although Rishi managed to get a moment or two as well. And I thought what we'd do is just quickly go through how each candidate did, or how I thought they did at any rate, in order of where they're deemed sort of likelihood to win, I've got it as. And then to make a few general points about some of the issues that came up and the things that I think might be problematic. So the first of them, of course, and I think still the favourite, and the one who will almost certainly make it to the next stage, is of course Rishi Sunak, the former Chancellor and the man who very much put the knife into Boris Johnson's career. Certainly, I think his resignation was the point of no return, at which point it became impossible, despite his best efforts for the Prime Minister to cling on. Rishi, as you'd expect, is very good on the economy, economic issues. He has quite a strong grasp of those. That's within the context and the frame of his personal view of it and his personal experience and personal political views on it. One of the problems he does have, however, with the party membership, which means that actually when it comes to the final two, depending on who his opposition is, he may not do so well, is that within the Tory party there's very much a perception of him as a spending chancellor, which is something they don't tend to like. That's quite a Labourite thing. It's a very interesting thing that he's perceived really as economically the most cautious. It's also not true when you look at it. He is actually, he's still very very conservative in his economic approaches, and I think that's just an indicator really of how over the last 12-13 years of Conservative government the sort of frame within which our politics takes place has moved, so that now he's considered to be on the left end of that, whereas previously he would have been very firmly on the right side. That's just one of those things that does happen when governments are in power for a long time, and that's seeing this as one consistent government through the Cameron coalition years up to Johnson. There's big differences there, but that is an indicator of how far these things can shift on quite a quick basis. Rishi has done a very good job on not giving unfunded tax pledges. The others have all been very keen on sort of saying, we'll cut this tax, we'll cut that tax, whatever. Sunak's very opposed to that. He's instinctively quite a conservative in the literal non-political sense. He doesn't want those unfunded tax pledges unless he can tell you, well, this is where we're going to do cuts. And that's where his commitments come in. It's unspoken because he won't want to say it to the party and he won't want to say it to the public. But if he's Prime Minister, we're going back to austerity. There's no doubt about that, I think, because he will need to find cuts to make up for the losses of Brexit and of COVID and the cost of living crisis and energy crisis as well. He does have a slight problem. In fact, he has two. The first one is related to that austerity thing. In this one, he's very weirdly being pitched as the defender of public services, which is quite strange because actually, that austerity will hit mostly public services. That's always what happens. The cuts are always made to public services. So yeah, I think that's quite an interesting one. That's how he's being pitched. And actually, if he wins, which he is still, I think I still have him just about as my favourite. It's a bit close, but we'll come to that in a second. You don't want to be going in telling people there's going to be austerity, but actually I think when you meet the hard reality of life, that might possibly change, and all of a sudden people will realise that actually austerity is back with a vengeance. The other problem he has is that he can't really he sort of struggles to pitch economic change. This idea that the economy has to change to work better, it's kind of difficult for him to do because he's been in charge of it for the last few years, which makes it a bit difficult for him to come out and say, yes, we need to fundamentally change the approach when it was his approach we were taking. I think particularly terrible moments for him. Firstly, when he tried to excuse his breach of COVID laws. The reason I was there, he said, was because I was working so hard. Terrible reason, terrible excuse, don't try and do that. And not unrelated to that, he gave that worst interview answer of all time, the all-time great. Well, I'm a bit of a perfectionist. I think that's my biggest flaw. I mean, seriously. Everyone, even that's what people who've just come out of university get told, don't do that one because it's pointless and stupid and no one believes it for a second. Second candidate, and the second most likely to win, and she's the one who's jostling in my mind with Rishi at the top, is Penny Mordaunt. I think she's quite likely to make the final two. It's by no means guaranteed, but I think she's quite likely. And I don't actually have that much to say about Penny Mordaunt, and that's sort of the problem. She's quite bland and functionary. She can be personable. She can be quite charismatic, actually, if you see other things she's done. But this time she was just a bit bland and dull. And honestly, I mean, I watched the debate about an hour and a half ago. I can't really remember anything she said that was particularly distinctive. She did have a bit of a problem with reconciling different viewpoints she's expressed in the past. She's coming under a lot of attack from the other candidates because she's seen as the likely or as one of the likely second placers in the MPs' votes. So she's coming under a lot of attack and a lot of focus from particularly the Truss and Badenoch camps, who are trying to put her out of contention, basically. In the debate, the particular area she had trouble with this was on the trans rights issue. Now, I'm not going to go into this in any depth in this video, save to use it as an example of what we've sort of conventionally been calling culture war issues. Now, culture war issues are very interesting. Culture war issues I would broadly define as things that weren't a problem until about, well, the Brexit referendum, and then all of a sudden have become this arguably big thing. They're not the thing is, the arguments in them, the culture war arguments, are not our arguments. They're things we've imported from America that we largely settled a long time ago, that have now been reheated and put in. But also, and this is a problem as well for Badenoch and a little bit for Truss, but it was a huge problem for Braverman as well before she dropped out. The truth is, the culture war actually is a really ineffective argument. All of the evidence shows that the public are absolutely not in the same place on culture war as the Conservative Party is. The Conservative Party considers it this big thing that's got to be fought. The public either don't care, in a lot of cases, statues, street names, things like that, or they fall very much on the other side of, well, actually, no, I think it's right to have these debates about history and how we teach history and how we look at history. You know, that's not trying to erase history, that's just how history works. So I think for her and for the candidates who are majoring on that, that's another thing where actually when they actually meet the hard reality of being in front of the general public, it plays well to the party base, certainly, but actually the general public, it doesn't play with at all. The public couldn't give a toss. So I think that might be an interesting one to watch, see how that dynamic plays out with whoever wins. I mean, if it's Rishi Sunak, he's not so keen on that stuff. Still does a little bit of it, but he's not so keen on it. So that could be an interesting one to watch. Third most likely candidate is, of course, Liz Truss. She is the great arch Brexit, I hope now, alongside Camille Badenoch, but Badenoch's probably almost certainly going to go out in the next two rounds, so we'll probably see the Brexiteer vote lining up behind Liz Truss. That being said, this debate really highlighted some of the big problems that Liz Truss has. Firstly, she is actually very robotic. in her in her speeches. I would say even in some cases, even more so, and last night was one of them, even more so than Theresa May was, and that's quite something. But she was very robotic. It all felt very scripted. She was perfectly on. There was no independent thought there at all. It had clearly all been written down for her. A lot of her appeal is based on supposed successes she's had with trade deals and whatnot post-Brexit. Again, there's another hard reality thing there, which is actually, while they claim they're successes, the vast majority of those trade deals that she has secured are in fact just rolled over EU trade deals that the same as we had with the EU. And the one that isn't, or the one major one that isn't, is the Australia one, which is currently going through the process, which incidentally, and this is a separate point not related to this, Parliament isn't going to get to look at before the government just declares it to be true, to be active, which is bad. Naughty politicians. That trade deal is, I think, of questionable value. It's not, the independent figures on it say it's not going to improve our economy all that much. It's going to be much better for Australia than it is for us, and particularly our agricultural sector is really going to suffer with that trade deal. But that's beside the point. But so the things she's selling as successes largely actually aren't successes. The other reason she really suffers is her loyalty to Boris Johnson. She's the only candidate now, I think, really, who maintains that loyalty. It's notable that they were all asked to say if Boris Johnson was honest. They were asked it as a yes/no question, or only one of them gave it as a yes/no question. Badenoch, Sunak, Mordaunt and Liz Truss all to various degrees said, well, I think most of them sometime, yeah, a little bit. Which is not a good look at this stage. We know he's not honest. It's fine. You can come out and say it. You don't have any residual loyalty. You don't need to. But Liz Truss particularly has that loyalty issue. She's still seen as the Boris, continuity Boris candidate, if you like. We saw that with Liz Truss, Nadine Dorries and Jacob Rees-Mogg endorsing her. I mean, firstly, wow, hell of two endorsements to get. Two people who would not be in the cabinet under anyone other than Boris Johnson, or they've obviously worked out Liz Truss, but nevertheless. So yeah, that was Liz. I don't think she did very well. I think she had a very poor night. The other thing about Liz Truss, I wish she'd drop this sort of pound shop knockoff Margaret Thatcher tribute act she's doing. Last night she was in there with this sort of white blouse on with a big bow thing. Almost exactly the same as the one that Thatcher used in the 1979 election broadcast she did. Oh, for giving over, Liz. I know you're trying to picture, and you are an arch-Thatcherite, but please, you just look weird. It makes you look so strange and desperate. It makes you look like a student politician who's desperately trying to show themselves to be statesman-like, when actually you're not. So yeah, my personal bit of advice to Liz, knock off the Thatcher tribute act, please. As much as anything, it will not play well in the Red Wall. As much as anything, anywhere up there, you say Thatcher, they are going to be going right to the other side again. So, so that's Liz Truss. Kemi Badenoch. Badenoch's a rising star. She is very good on her feet. She's good in Parliament. She's good with the public. I think her problem is she's too right-wing. She's very much on the right wing of the party. Nobody really knows her outside of politics. If you're in politics, you will. If you're outside, you probably wouldn't recognise her in the street if you passed her. She's quite good at bringing things back to the personal level, to talking about, well, personally I did this, personally I did that. But I suspect actually a lot of that, if it was properly scrutinised by the general public and the press, would actually fall apart quite quickly. She's quite punchy. She was doing quite a lot of chuntering last night on the trans rights issue. She was talking about, every time Liz Truss was talking, you could hear her in the background going, "Tell the truth, Liz. Come on, tell the truth, Liz," which was a bit weird. But again, she's too focused, as far as I'm concerned, on the culture war and the ultra right-wing stuff that, whilst it works for the party, does not generally work for the public. The public tends to be on the slightly sort of centre-right side of things. She's far too far up the one end of it. I think she will be the second next to be knocked out. The other thing she's big on truth. It's time to tell the truth was how she started her campaign. It sounds good. but it's not a policy base. There's no policy behind it. Truth is not a policy. And I don't think she actually has a well-developed policy platform. And I don't think she has really any route to getting one in time for the increased scrutiny of the public. So actually, I think she will be knocked out pretty quickly, but not before Tom Tugendhat. Tom Tugendhat, the Rory Stewart of this Conservative leadership contest, widely considered to have won the debate last night. I personally would be with that. I think he's sensible. He comes across as a thoughtful politician. You might not agree with all his viewpoints. I know I certainly don't. But he comes across as a sensible person who has actually thought about the things he's saying and is not just tossing them out because he thinks they're going to go well with the public. He's almost certainly to go out on the next vote, which I believe is on Monday. Partially because he's sensible, I think. The party membership aren't really interested in that necessarily. Although there has been a bit more of a move in that centrist direction that is a bit more accepting of that post the last two by-elections. He did, whether intentionally or not, he did turn into Professor Dumbledore from Harry Potter at one point in giving a line about how difficult it is to stand up to one's friends as opposed to standing up to one's enemies, which is frightfully easy. I don't know whether that was intentional, trying to buy the Harry Potter vote, or potentially that was a trans rights thing, but we won't go into that. I don't know, maybe he was trying to sell that on that basis. Made the only minor gaffe of the day, despite generally being considered as coming out on top, when he was talking about the NHS, and he talked about the NHS. He was asked a question by an NHS worker in the audience and said, NHS did this and this and this, and you gave me 3 wonderful children or whatever it was. It was a slightly awkward moment where you go, well, not you personally, obviously. I think, as gaffes go, not a terrible one, but I think that makes him endearing. It's a bit like Rory Stewart and the bin thing, I think. He's big on, obviously, he has made a joke himself about his army career and how much he mentions that. I think he's got a point. I think we get it, Tom, you were in the army, you served in a leadership position there. That's great, and that shows your dedication to serving your country, certainly. I do wonder, I think he's now orienting a little bit away from that onto the serving your country stuff. I actually think that if he pushes too hard on that, if he did go any further, which he's not going to, but if he did, I think that might start wearing a bit as well and coming across as a little bit insincere. It's a difficult one. You have to show your devotion to your country, of course, but there is a point at which it becomes a little... Yeah, it starts looking like you're pushing that because you've got nothing else to push. But he also, his big advantage, and it's his big advantage in this whole thing, and it was very much on show last night, is that he is free to criticise, having not been a member of Boris Johnson's government at all, unlike the others. He is very much in a position to criticise. He has been a long-standing critic of Boris Johnson. He's very much in a position to say what he thinks, to tell the truth, let's be honest, to tell the truth and put it that way, whereas the others are a bit more limited in that. The prime example of that yesterday was the honesty question, which we've already discussed within the concept of the others. Tom Tugendhat was asked it and said, is Boris Johnson honest? And he went, no. And it got, I think, the biggest round of applause all night. It was obviously an applause line. He obviously knew it was going to come up and knew that was going to be his answer. But I think it puts him in a very good place. He is the only one who can really, really super credibly claim to be a change candidate, not a legacy candidate. A few of the others, Kemi Badenoch in particular, tried to claim the legacy candidate status, but she has also been in Boris Johnson's government and is largely in line with a lot of his policies, so actually it's kind of difficult for her to credibly do that. General points. That's each of the candidates done. General points, green issues, really big problem for all of them. Party base is not in the same place as the public on green issues. That, I think, is a big problem for all of them. They can't, they're having to prevaricate a bit, which is bad. Certainly with their standing with the public. It's actually going to be very interesting. Obviously, Monday and Tuesday, we're expecting record-breaking heat across the country. I looked at my my weather down here. earlier today, and I think we're now due at 39 on Monday and 38 on Tuesday, so that's not going to be fun. Make sure you stay safe in that. Slight side point, but please take it seriously. It's not just a nice sunny day, it's actively dangerous for even fit and healthy people, so do take care of yourself on that. But I do wonder if that might focus a little bit of attention on this issue. Unfortunately, it's with the party. I'm not sure it will make much of a difference. But with the public, I think it might, and that will, I think, be an interesting one to see how that goes. On the operational side of the debate, Christian Guru-Murphy did a fantastic job, as he usually does, of managing it, and kudos to Channel 4 for pulling something together in 4 days or whatever it was they had. It was a really, really fantastic debate, very well managed. It was. I found it starkly and interestingly in contrast to a lot of the US presidential debates, which have a lot more time to go on, but are actually tend to be managed pretty terribly. Overall, winners and losers. Tom Tugendhat was the obvious winner. Doesn't matter though; he'll be out the next round on Monday, so that's irrelevant. None of the others really moved the dial, as far as I'm concerned. They just came out and did their usual stick. I think of them all, Liz Truss had the worst day. I'm not sure. I think there's been a big move to get the right wingers to row in behind Liz Truss. We saw yesterday a bit of a fight amongst the European Research Group, the Spartan Brexiteers, as they like to think of themselves, where Mark Francois, the chair of the group, told the rest to vote. They said now that Suella Braverman, who had been their previous candidate, is out, we should all row in behind Truss as the true Brexit candidate. And got a lot of very angry messages saying, no, we're all free thinkers in this group, and I quite like Kemi, actually, thank you very much. So it'll be interesting to see how they split, actually, I think, on that one. Other than that, general winners and losers. Politicians generally, clearly the losers. It was very clear there's just so little trust in politicians at the moment, if it wasn't already. Astonishingly so, I think, in that debate. I think Keir Starmer came out of it very well, as you often do as a politician who's not in a debate, because compared to a lot of them, he looks very sensible and measured, which has always been his big thing. I think on the cost of living crisis, things like that, I don't think any of them really gave the full impression of actually understanding it. There was a lot of nice words, but actually, in terms of understanding it, I mean, it sort of doesn't matter if they do or don't, because the public don't think they do anyway, even if they do. So it's sort of a bit. It was always going to come across as a bit superficial and understanding. That's one of the big problems Rishi Sunak has. People don't mind so much rich politicians. We're used to having wealthy politicians. What people do mind, and this is where I think Rishi is going to suffer a bit, is rich politicians who pretend they know what it's like to be working class and to have come from the bottom. He's big on that. His campaign launch video was all about where he'd come from, neglecting to mention all the advantages he had along the way. So that one, I think, doesn't go well with the public. It tends to be an off-put of the public. None of them really had answers on how they were going to deal with the cost of living crisis either, and that is a big problem. And I think one of the problems the Conservative Party as a whole has, actually, it's a big problem for the government, is they're kind of a government out of ideas. They have big been in power too long syndrome at this point, where they've run out of ideas for tackling things, even big emergency things. So there's just no real clue on how they're going to deal with it, and that's a big problem for them. I think it was a big problem for the candidates yesterday. Also, they all need to stop, please, in these things, stop saying, that's a very important question, or that's a very good question. I know people do it as a time-buying thing. Personally, I prefer just sitting in silent thought for 10 seconds rather than filling it with that. Certainly that's an important question, that's a good question. It's quite patronising. It's like, I know it's a good question, that's why I'm asking it. I know it's an important question, that's why it needs an answer. Think about a good answer and come back to me as soon as you can. Don't just tell me it's a good question, I know that. So yeah, that was the first of the leadership debates. The second one is tomorrow is Sunday night. It'll probably be after work on Monday. I'll do a little video on that. I'll watch that again. It won't be live, so it will be a bit delayed. But I'll record you another one of these on that, just giving my thoughts to see if anything's changed. Maybe some of them will come across better. This one was a bit of a dry run for them. It's the first time they've really had a chance to be before actual members of the public. So I'll put that together on Monday. I shall get this up on the old interwebs now. If you enjoy it, let me know. If you've got any questions, chat. If you're on my social media, you've got that. If you're not, follow me at Stephen J A Hill. That's J for Juliet, A for Andrew, or Alpha if you prefer NATO standard, on Twitter. Stephen J A Hill. Put any questions in the comments, like it, share it. If you really enjoy it and you think more people should see this, then do share it to anyone you know. Yes, I shall see you on Monday. Hope you have a good weekend. Oh, and stay blooming safe on Monday, particularly when it's going to be super hot. Not political, and I don't care what your politics are. Stay safe. Want to see you all back again on Monday. Bye for now.